views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. 10 days ago, the state legislature completed its session late, as is often the case, with a variety of bills on mayoral control of schools, some ethics reform, funding for housing the homeless, and more. But did they go far enough? Our guest tonight is Assemblyman Jeff Danewitz, who is the chair of the Bronx Assembly delegation. He will give us his point of view about those issues and more. Also, we'll be joined during the program by Congressman Joe Crowley, who is one of the Congress members who held the recent sit-in on the House floor over gun legislation. We'll get a report from him on what went down and why, and what's in the future for national gun control. If you have questions or comments, then send an email to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org or post it on our Facebook page, and we'll read it on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, the Assemblyman from the 81st Assembly District in the Bronx is also the chair of the Bronx Democratic County Committee. Jeff Danewitz, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
It's wonderful to be back here.
Once again, and I did count before we came on the air, this is your 21st appearance on our program.
Wow.
So congratulations for that, and thank you for being with us all those many times. Nonetheless, we have a lot to talk about. Let's start with the state legislature. Why can't we get the big issues dealt with before we have to be beyond the last day? I think I even communicated with you on that Friday morning and said, gee, you know, are you guys still working? And you said, well, we still have the big things to do. And I'm like, these are the biggest issues of the year. And not only are we on the last day, we're beyond the last day. Why can't we get it done earlier?
You know, when I first saw the legislative calendar in January, I noticed it ended on a Thursday, and I said, nope, it's going to end.
It'll never happen.
It just doesn't end on a Thursday. It'll end on Friday, at some point on Friday. Actually, it was really Saturday morning. That's just how things are. A lot of things don't get done until everything gets done. Deals are made at the last second, but that's true in so many areas. Labor management negotiation, you name it, deals are made at the last second. So a lot of stuff doesn't get done until the very end. I mean, I don't have the number, but I would say probably half the legislation we passed during the entire session gets done during the last 2 weeks. And
well, I was hoping I was going to get a different answer.
No, that's the truth.
That's the
I mean, do I wish it were different? Yeah, I wish that January and February were a lot more productive. You know, we not only worked late Thursday night, we came back early Friday morning, and we finished Saturday morning at 5:30.
It's kind of unbelievable. They talked about legislators sleeping in their seats, but this is not the first time that this has happened. Let's talk about some of the specifics. Mayoral control of New York City schools. So the current mayor wanted 3 years. He ended up getting a year, but he had to concede a whole a bunch of things, talking about funding transparency. Apparently the state is going to have some influence or at least some oversight on the city's education budget. Rather extraordinary concept. Also, he had to give some jurisdiction over charter schools back to the state. What are your thoughts?
I think it was hyper-partisanship at its worst. You know, I was never a big booster of mayoral control of the schools. And I remember the discussion back in, what was it, 02 or 03, when proponents said, well, if you shouldn't be against it just because of who the mayor is, just because the mayor is a Republican or whatever party Bloomberg was that particular year, you should either be for it or against it based upon the merits. Bloomberg got 6 years and then a renewal of 7 years, or maybe it was the other way around. So he got 13 years worth of mayoral control. When a Democratic mayor came in, suddenly the Senate Republicans didn't think mayoral control was worth extending for 6 years. They didn't think it was worth extending for 3 years. So because it was Mayor de Blasio, they fought it. And so we got 1 year with strings attached. And to me, that's a disgrace. Either you're for it or against it. Either it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. It should not depend on who the mayor is.
And we are going to in a moment get into the politics of some of that. Then just in terms of legislating something and putting a program into place, 1 year means a year from now, you're probably going to come back on the show for your 22nd appearance, and I'm going to ask you the same thing or the same question about, a decision about mayoral control of the schools, because it's got to come up again. What a waste of time.
It's not only a waste of time, but anytime you create uncertainty, that's not good for running a huge system like the New York City public school system. And we know that next year, this mayor will have to go back, maybe only get a year again. Why should the mayor have to go back every year, possibly make concessions? Why should the city have to go hat in hand to legislators, many of whom are not from New York City? I don't think that upstate Long Island legislators should be controlling New York City education governance in the first place. They ought to butt out.
I think we could understand why Republican senators, if you just concede the partisanship, would not like Mayor de Blasio, because he certainly has worked to overturn the majority in the Senate. There's no question about that.
Welcome to partisan politics.
I understand
That's
that.
what elections are for.
But what really is, I think, the question here is the relationship of the governor and the mayor. If the governor was a Democrat and the partisanship was as strong as you are alleging that it is, wouldn't the governor be the one to say, look, this is not right, it's not good for the schools, even if I don't like Mayor de Blasio? I'm basically conceding the concept to the Republican-led Senate. What is the deal between the mayor and the governor, that the governor couldn't just say, well, you know what, Mr. de Blasio, I don't necessarily like you, but it's really best for the schools?
Well, the governor supported the 3-year extension. The governor and the mayor, do they get along? Well, I guess there's a little bit of tension there.
I think there's more than a little, but okay.
As long as I can remember, there were always problems between the mayor of the city of New York and the governor. Lindsay and Rockefeller, you name it, there have always been problems. I mean, this is going a little bit far in most people's eyes. I would hope that both Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio would put some of that stuff aside and just do its best. Certainly when it comes to the kids, do its best.
Governor Cuomo, and I've asked this to some of your colleagues, maybe even to you in the past, Governor Cuomo put out a proposal to cut CUNY almost $500 million. I don't think it was a realistic proposal, unless he was simply trying to cut the City University of New York and make them inoperable. But it made the front page of the newspapers, and I mean, he played it for a little while and then backed off. What was that about?
Well, first of all, I'd like to think that the Assembly Democrats made sure that that proposal never became a reality. The governor called it a cost shift, shifting costs from the state to the city. My translation is he wanted to cut, I think it was $485 million from the CUNY budget. That was disgraceful to attempt to cut money.
Well, it's not realistic. You couldn't keep managing the city universities of New York if you did.
It would have been, well, the city would have had to pick up the slack.
Which is not realistic.
CUNY could not have been cut like that. I'm a CUNY graduate. A lot of other people, we weren't going to tolerate it. We weren't going to tolerate it, and we did. The Assembly Democrats said no, and it was not part of the final budget. We were able to stop that horrible proposal from becoming a reality.
You're not willing to speculate what was in the governor's mind when he did that?
How could I?
I think we just got a no
How
comment.
could I possibly know?
But one more thing about education, and this is the idea of charter schools. Now, the oversight is going to be thrown for charter schools to SUNY. Your thoughts on charter schools, because there are charter schools that are good schools in the borough of the Bronx that are complaining right now because they say, you know what, we're not getting equity in funding, and yet we're showing good results and are really providing an important alternative for the public schools in the Bronx and the city of New York.
Well, there are good charter schools and bad charter schools. Some people have this this illusion. It is an illusion that all charter schools are good. Some are good, some are bad. Should there be charter schools? I'm a supporter of public education. But there are a lot of kids in charter schools. I want them to do well. I do not think charter schools ought to be given preferential treatment. And that's what some people want to see happen. You know, they say we're not being treated fairly. I think some of the charter schools led by the Success Academies, they want to be treated in a preferential fashion. Some schools want to be able to pick and choose which kids come in. It's no accident that many charter schools have a lower percentage of English language learners, of special ed children, and they want to cherry pick the kids. And sometimes if you pick who goes in, you can almost predict the results.
A proper funding formula would be per student? In other words, you determine how many students they deal with, and everybody gets the same amount per student?
I think many charter school advocates want to have it both ways. They want to have the freedom to do things the way they want. They want to be able to access all this private money. There's globs of private money from Wall Street types and hedge fund people that go into charter schools. They don't give their money to the public schools. They have all those advantages. They want to be able to move into space that public schools have. They want a lot. I think we should do what we need to do. We should make sure that the kids are being treated properly, but we should simply not give charter schools an unfair advantage over public schools.
Assemblyman, over the years that you've been on a show and that I've known you, you have been a staunch anti-gun advocate. And so at this moment, we're going to go to the telephone and bring on your colleague in government, Congressman Joe Crowley. Congressman, are you with us? Do we have the congressman? There we go. Is Congressman Crowley with us? Hey.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, Gary. How are you?
I'm doing well. Assemblyman Dinowitz in the room with me. And
hey, Joe. How are you?
Hey, how are you guys?
Good.
Okay. Nice to have you with us. We wanted to just interrupt the dialogue about the state legislature with the Assemblyman to talk with you and get a firsthand report about the sit-in, which I think was interesting and revolutionary, if you will. So just give me a little background. Why did you and your colleagues participate in a sit-in in the House of Representatives?
Well, Gary, I think really it was born out of a tremendous frustration that I think that not only the members of Congress feel, and I mean both sides out to some degree, but certainly on the minority side and the Democratic side of the aisle, but I think that Americans are feeling. It's particularly felt in Congress because on the issue of gun violence, because when there's ever a mass slaughter or a mass shooting like we saw in Orlando, we stand for a moment of silence for a minute, and then we just basically sit and go back to as business as usual, as if nothing happened. And it has just gotten to a level of frustration that this really was, from the ground up, it's not a leadership-driven issue in that respect, that people have felt so frustrated. And John Lewis, being the leader that he is in terms of his own history, of sitting down to stand up, just decided that he had enough and asked his colleagues to join him on the floor. And it just was, I'm not going to say it was entirely impromptu, but I think in terms of how it grew, it was very, very much impromptu.
Congressman, a lot of criticism, certainly from the other side of the aisle, was, well, this is just a political stunt. That's very nice. I mean, they turned off the cameras. I mean, we all know about what happened. Realistically, I mean, you made a stand. A lot of people, certainly who support your point of view, would say, well, that was a good thing. You drew attention to the problem, but really, did you get anywhere? I mean, you left, and now you're going to have to come back and debate the issue once again, potentially to the same result.
Well, I think what's interesting about this is that I think the powers that be in Washington would prefer that we just keep going along and getting along and going along and going along without really doing anything. And I think in the drop of a hat, we're forming select committees, whether it be on Benghazi or the Planned Parenthood issue. Here you have people being slaughtered, and there's this silence. There's nothing. Not a bill moving to a committee, not a select committee being established. Nothing is happening. And what we were able to accomplish was to bring the focus and the attention of the entire country and the world in many respects, in terms of focusing on what we're not doing in Washington. And what we're asking for and what we're going to get, Gary, is we want to vote. We want to vote on these issues. We want people on the record. As what happened in the Senate, we're not. This is not over by any stretch of the imagination. And I think, look, we have different rules. I think the phenomenon which took place here is that Periscope now exists, and they weren't able to completely shut us down and shut us out. But we're not giving up. This is something we're going to continue to do until we get a vote on these issues on the floor of the House.
Last question, sir. Realistically, what do you expect to see? What would you like to see? And what is realistic to see in terms of new gun legislation on a national scale?
Well, first, I'd say that it's not going to be business as usual. I think that's the first message to Paul Ryan. We want him to put two bills specifically on the floor. The first is the no-fly, no-buy, a bill that would require that if you're on the no-fly list because you're suspected of being a terrorist, that you cannot purchase a weapon legally in the United States. And secondly, what we're asking for is an expansive background check to give law enforcement the tool it needs to make sure that individuals, be they criminals, terrorists, or the mentally unstable, do not have access to these assault weapons or, quite frankly, weapons, period.
Congressman, we're going to let you go. I know you were busy tonight, but I do appreciate you taking a few moments out to speak with us. And
Thank you.
When you leave, I'm going to quiz Assemblyman Dinowitz about what can be done on the state level, or if there's any, because we haven't heard any dialogue on the state level. So just so you know, that's where we're going. Actually, my last question for you is, I was wondering, did you pull out your guitar and play on the floor of the House to keep people entertained?
Well, I got to tell you, there was a point there, and Jeff knows my love of music and the power of it. There was a moment on the floor when a colleague of mine was asking unanimous consent to speak, and the Republicans were shouting him down. I just started singing "We Shall Overcome." And
so it was you?
joined in. I have to tell you something. It's hard to shout down "We Shall Overcome." In fact, they couldn't.
Wow.
They shut up and listened.
There you go. All right. Congressman, thank you again for your time, and I'm sure we'll see you around
Jeff.
town.
I hope you can do something up in Albany as well. God bless.
All right, thank you. Assemblyman, it's been quiet in Albany as far as gun control. There's been a lot of, I guess, understanding that New York has some of the toughest gun laws in the country. Is there anything realistically that you'd like to see this state undertake?
Well, first of all, we do have the toughest gun laws in the country. When the SAFE Act was passed, we certainly got the toughest gun laws, and that was just a couple of years ago. Have we done enough? Not nearly, because one political party is owned by the NRA, which stands for National Rifle Association. And as long as one of the houses of the legislature is controlled, is led by a Republican, John Flanagan, not to pick on him, but he's the leader, it's going to be very hard to make any more real progress. We need to have a Democratic majority in the Senate, just like we need to have Democratic majorities on a federal level. That's when things are going to start to get done, and that's the reality.
Speaking about getting things done, I think there was frustration by good government groups on ethics reform in the state legislature. The LLC loophole is still a reality. Again, we go back to the governor. There's a lot of talk that he wasn't really serious about wanting to close it. Why do we still have that loophole for donations to campaigns?
Well, it takes three to tango in Albany: the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly. The Assembly passed a bill to close the LLC loophole. I was a co-sponsor of the bill. I've long been a supporter of closing the LLC loophole. But us passing a one-house bill doesn't help if we don't have a partner in the other house. And we did pass some reform this year, not nearly enough, but if we passed everything on the agenda of good government groups and of the New York Times, they would still criticize us for not doing, whatever else. But the reality is we didn't do enough. But we did do a few things. We took the first step in pension forfeiture for people who were convicted of public officials who were convicted of crimes relating to their office. I think that was an important step, not because it's going to change the world, but because I think it sends out an important message to the world that we're serious, and to public officials that if you're going to do something bad, you're going to have to pay the price, and your family may have to pay the price as well.
Some people believe along the same lines that limiting outside income for legislators would have the same effect, maybe not clear up Albany and clear up issues to begin with. You for it or against it? You like the idea?
I'm for limiting outside income. I mean, there are some people who would like us all to take a vow of poverty. I'm sure some of the editorial boards who advocate that have people who make a multiple of my salary, but people should not be crying over over what our income is. I think we do have to limit outside income. Would I ban outside income? No, I would not ban outside income.
Like the city council did.
Well, they did it
And then
temporarily.
gave themselves a raise.
Well, that's fine. But I don't think their ban was more, I think their ban was a temporary ban as I understand it. But they didn't have too many people who had outside income, so it was probably easy for most of them to do. But it was probably a good thing. Should we totally ban outside income? I think the problem is, how do you figure out what counts? If somebody gets elected to office but they have a business, we have people in the legislature, they own a pharmacy, for example. It's not just lawyers. There are other people who own small businesses. And what do people do with those kind of businesses? So it's not as simple a question as people would suggest, but I do think in light of the recent convictions of the leaders of both houses of the legislature that we really have to do something, and we can't let it go on forever without addressing.
As an aside, apparently some decision by the Supreme Court today, I forget which state it was,
Virginia.
But in Virginia, potentially will open up the door for Dean Skelos and Shelley Silver maybe to get new trials.
I would say that that's a distinct possibility.
A distinct possibility. Going back to the LLC loophole, Governor Cuomo has suggested now in a couple of articles that I read that if you're really serious about closing the LLC loophole, now we have to have a constitutional convention to do that. That seems not realistic, and that would suggest to me and to others that the governor is not real serious yet.
Well, a constitutional convention, I think, is a really bad idea because that could open up the door to all kinds of mischief relating to bad changes in pensions, for example, relating to a whole bunch of other issues. That's really passing the buck. And by the way, a constitutional convention is almost rigged because the way the delegates are elected to such a convention is along state Senate lines. There's, I think, 3, whatever the number is, per Senate district. The state Senate lines are drawn in a very partisan fashion in favor of the Republican Party. Why would I want a convention whose delegates are elected based on lines that were drawn by the Republicans? I think it's not a good thing for us to do. Even aside from that, we should be passing that kind of reform without doing a constitutional convention. That's just ridiculous.
It seems to me it would be, in a way, abdicating, what the legislature should be working on.
People elect representatives to do things, not to pass the buck with a constitutional convention.
Assemblyman, let's talk about some local issues. Both you and I participated in a meeting between the Jerome Park Reservoir Task Force, of which we are both members, as well as the NYPD Counterterrorism Task Force and the Department of Environmental Protection about access to the Jerome Park Reservoir. Rather than hear my comments, what are your thoughts about how that meeting went and the prospects for getting a greater sense of access to the reservoir?
I'm an optimist, and nothing that was said at that meeting has convinced me that it is a terrorist threat for us to get a little bit closer to the water, especially in light of the fact that if somebody wanted to, throw something into the water or whatever, there's a million ways to do it. And to let people in the community a little bit closer is not going to jeopardize the safety of our water supply. I want access. I think first and foremost we have to have security. There's no question. We have to make sure our water supply is safe. But having said that, I think there are ways, if the administration, if the city administration decides they want to give the community greater access to the reservoir, including access to the dividing wall, then they could find a way to do it in a way that's safe for our water supply.
This could be very well the first announcement of this at a recent FMC meeting, the Facilities Monitoring Committee meeting. The DEP announced that they were prepared to have another weekend of access to the Jerome Park Reservoir. What new ideas would you like to put into that would maybe move the process forward?
Well, I would like to do more of that, not just do it once a year. I don't think having those gigantic guns, I'm not sure what type of guns they were, with I guess they were DEP officers, I don't think that was quite necessary. Regular pistols, I'm sure could have been enough for them to provide the security from the people from our neighborhood.
Right.
I understand that they try to make sure that there were no possibilities of problems. But the idea that we couldn't even bring our cell phones with us was just ridiculous. What do they think we were going to do? We weren't allowed to bring bottled water with us. What are they afraid? We're going to put water into the reservoir? It just, I mean, that was a little over the top, I thought. But
Assemblyman, in the little time we have, I want to bring up this subject. It was documented very clearly by the Riverdale Press that some people involved in PS 24, and I'm just going to quote, Assistant Principal Manny Verdi says Northwest Bronx Assemblyman Jeff Dinowitz is seeking to keep minority and lower income students out of the school. And in addition to the article that they wrote, there was a dialogue that they're about to sue you for defamation because you retaliated in words. What are your thoughts?
the good thing about being sued for defamation is if you tell the truth, you're going to win the lawsuit. So I'm not worried about their petty lawsuits. Here's the problem, and we have a problem at a number of our schools. It's not just 24, and I've discussed this problem not just about 24. At many of our schools, PS 81, PS 19, PS 7, we have overcrowding, and a lot of it is artificial, but the problem with PS 24 was the most severe. Why? Because you had a combination of two things. Number one, the annex to the school, through incompetence on the part of the Department of Education, was lost. And when I say the Department of Education, I mean downtown at Tweed, but also through the through the leadership of the school ignoring the problem, even though they knew about it.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. The charge was that one of your staff members, Randy Martos, was literally looking at at who was going to get into the school and was limiting who could get into the school based on their ethnicity.
Well, that's a lie. That never happened. Randy Martos, a former PA president, plus the current PA president, were invited by the principal to help in the registration process. The only thing they ever saw was some of the parents coming in showing the proof that they are within the zone that the school is part of. They were helping with the process. They were invited to be there. There was no one was turned away, nothing like that. It's a lie, and anybody who says that is a liar. And that's for the record, and so put that in the defamation suit.
Well, it's on TV, or it was on TV, so you had your say. Assemblyman, thank you very much for your time. Never
Good to
enough
be here.
time for us. If you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org, or put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We ask you to like Bronx Talk on Facebook, and you can check out our archives at BronxNet.org. Bronx Talk is on the lower right navigation bar. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks to our producer, Jayla Jubetis. Our director is Shirley Arietta. To Helen and Clyde and the cast of thousands, thank them. And thank you. See you next week. Good night.
Hello, good people of the Bronx and beyond. Welcome to A Life in Art.